Hello and welcome to this edition of TZM Global Radio. I'm your host for today, James Phillips from the UK chapter of the Zeitgeist Movement and TZM Education. Hope you're all doing well out there today, guys. The introduction for today's show was by comedian Steve Hughes, in which he goes through the ridiculous and absurd notion that all of us must be working every hour that God sends, if indeed there is a God to send them, in order to earn a living on this planet. Apparently we're the only species living here that actually needs to go out and do so. Obviously we live in a great age of productivity to meet the life needs of all of humankind, and yet we are working pretty much the same amount as we used to. We're working less actually, but marginally so, compared to what tools we actually have on offer to solve human problems and decrease the monotonous, drudgery, laborious wage slavery that most have to endure, and in which 80% of people actually can't stand. That doesn't sound like any kind of aspiration for the future of humankind, yet if you turn on your radios and TVs, anything you ever hear on talk shows and coming out of politicians is just how we need to get more growth and jobs and everything will be fine. I think this probably speaks volumes about the lack of critical thinking that's actually taking place out there at the moment, in my opinion, but there you go. I think Doug Stanhope, another comedian, expressed this rather well, or at least the sentiment rather well, when he said that we should be not getting drunk on the weekends but getting drunk on the weekdays. Hey, no job's that hard that we can't be a little bit hungover when we do it, and then we can have the weekends sober to actually spend our free time doing the shit we want to do. It's a very interesting concept. I'm not sure it would necessarily need to be the case were we to orientate society technically to achieve a sustainable abundance with the intelligent management of the Earth's resources via science and technology, but I'm sure you're all aware of that particular viewpoint on this radio show. Speaking of this radio show and of work, I'm going to need to ask my fellow ZGs listening to this on YouTube and on Blog Talk Radio for a little bit of your own hard-pressed labour, if possible, please, as TZM Global Radio is now taking submissions for shows. It is a quite time-consuming task to piece the radio shows together, and actually, speaking of which, I received a very good constructive criticism on my previous radio show, in which it said that you would like more interviews to be on the show. It's quite hard to pin down people for interviews at a time that suits both schedules, and quite time consuming. Plus I figure that you all love the sound of my voice as much as I do. That was a joke. But so that is really the main reason for it. But I would say one thing back to that critique, and that would be not to ask what your radio show can do for you, but what you can do for your radio show. So rather than ask for myself or Jason Lord or Peter or anyone else to step forward and do more interviews, how about you do it? You know, it's really not rocket science in getting an interview with certain people who you find interesting, or certain projects that you want to bring to light here on this radio show. All you do is you send the person an email asking if you can interview them, set up a Skype call or some other way of doing it, record them, and then do a little intro, piece it together, and send it off. And the address to send those into is submit@thezeitgeistmovement.com. Well, that is because I'm going to be reading the 10th and final article from the Minds in the Making section of the TZM Education website. So without further ado, I'm going to start reading that essay now. To be employed or not to be employed. The notion that unemployment could ever be a positive thing would seem to most to be a bizarre notion, And in our current socio-economic system, I would have to agree, as employment provides the means by which people can obtain the purchasing power to meet theirs and their families' life needs. In an NLRBE, the emphasis would instead be placed on the deliberate automation and mechanization of laborious, dangerous, and monotonous labor for the efficiency and abundance it would provide. Given such an underlying economic premise, it would follow that higher rates of human employment would mean that the economic system is not functioning optimally. So higher rates of employment, in its very often socially meaningless, overly simplified and coercive sense at least, could only be seen as a negative trend in such a system. This point is further outlined by Joe Alexopoulos in the following talk, and that's from Z-Day 2012 in Los Angeles if you want to punch that up on YouTube. This turns the issue of employment on its head, but brings with it a point of contention for many. That being, if people do not have jobs, they will lay about doing nothing useful for society. An absence of threat equals an abundance of giving. As pointed out in the article Riding the Trojan Horse to the NLRBE, it may be best to first establish empathy with the idea that everyone in society should do their fair share. From here we could then perhaps build from the technological unemployment argument and the idea that a job should surely serve some sort of social purpose, and on to the idea of an NLRBE. Once this has been established and at an appropriate juncture of conversation, it could be worthwhile asking, what would be so wrong with people spending more time relaxing anyway? Surely in a society with human needs being met without a price tag, more relaxation time would only result in positive net social outcome. This may be something which is actually achievable in the transition to an NLRBE via the idea of an unconditional basic income, or universal basic income, outlined by Federico Pistono in the following presentation. And that is entitled What If Everybody Got Free Cash by Federico Pistono, Myths and Facts About Unconditional Basic Income. This underlying concern regarding human motivation, which will be dealt with later in this article, is perhaps more to do with the common sense notion that there will always be a need for someone to contribute in some sort of productive and meaningful way in any social model. So and it is not fair for some to shirk their social responsibilities whilst others do all the work.
All of this,
is this moral
job
stance
malarkey
actually achievable without the profit motive driving human incentive? A noteworthy point might be that with such a threat hanging over any contract, social or otherwise, it seems surprising that anyone still acts in an altruistic manner in society, and yet they do. Even in the most socially stratified and unequal developed nation of the USA, research from www.independentsector.org shows that American adult volunteers contribute an average of 3.5 hours per week to social causes, totaling 19.9 billion hours per annum, with an estimated dollar value of $225.9 billion to the US economy. So, from the outset, it does not seem like a threat of this nature is required for people to donate their time to meaningful social causes without a price tag. In fact, it seems that in a highly technical, efficient and strategically organized society, social contribution would be garnered from the reciprocal relationship that would exist within a social system directly aligned to meeting human needs. Whereas in our current culture, the more you give away, the more risk you incur with regards to meeting your life needs. The work-shy fallacy. Contrary to popular opinion, it's actually the labour for income gain which reinforces a generally lackadaisical disposition in many today. Much of the research carried out in this area shows that extrinsic motivators provide increased incentive, but only in laborious and monotonous labour roles. These are precisely the sort of roles that would be phased out by machines in an NLRBE. This point is made in more detail in the article A Change in Education and Social Incentives and is briefly summarised in the following RSA Animate on Motivation by Daniel Pink, and that's entitled Drive, the Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. When seen from another perspective, it becomes obvious that after people have been subjected to having to engage in likely pointless, laborious or monotonous labour all day, that they just want to switch off and relax before having to return to it all again the following day. When the issue is put this way, the behaviour of those who can take the option of meeting their needs without having to submit to what amounts to paid slavery seems to a limited extent, within our current social framework at least, entirely rational. This is not to excuse this disposition per se, as this behaviour would no doubt impact on family and friends who would very likely have to support such a potentially selfish individual. Rather, my aim is to attempt to elucidate why someone would engage in such behaviour. It also seems like there is a double standard going on, in that many people who would readily chastise those who shirk work freely admit that they would give it up immediately if they won the lottery. Adopting the alternative viewpoint. Let's adopt the viewpoint of those who have concerns regarding the work-shy living off their taxes whilst they go to jobs, enabling these feckless layabouts to live in the lap of luxury. Before doing so, though, it might be worthwhile noting that any money that is paid to these individuals is likely a drop in the ocean compared to how much is being continually pumped towards the top of the financial food chain through fractional reserve banking and other hierarchical financial mechanisms. Fractional reserve banking and some of the other inherently inequality-producing mechanisms are outlined in the following clip from Zeitgeist Addendum. And that's Money Creation and Fractional Reserve Banking from Zeitgeist Addendum. And the following radio show by Peter Joseph on structural classism. And that is TZM Global Radio Show 12/28/11, Peter Joseph. The following documentaries outline the history of finance and money in more detail, and that's The Money Masters, Money as Debt, and the growing gap of inequality is briefly expressed in the following report by Lee Camp, and that's entitled How US Inequality is Spiraling Out of Control. Structural classism aside, concerns and frustrations of this sort are of course still valid to a large extent, and are certainly no stranger to me, as I used to hold exactly the same disposition. I would often passionately argue that if people just got up off their backside and did an honest day's work, or something to that effect, then society would run far more smoothly. Of course, to the limited extent of our current social circumstance, this overly simplistic and naive disposition should be entirely understandable. No one likes to feel they are doing all the hard work whilst others reap the rewards. Apparently even penguins feel the same incredulity when one of their brethren opts for a free ride. And that video is entitled Criminal Penguins, Frozen Planet BBC One. If you haven't seen this, I highly recommend it. It will have you in absolute stitches of laughter. Building a rewarding social environment. This is precisely why the learning environment in an NLRBE would need to be arranged in such a way as to make this kind of behaviour extremely rare, by catering for a wide variety of interests free at the point of access. No such thing as a free lunch. This is not to say that everything will come without effort, and just because there is no monetary reward on offer in such a world. We would need to arrange educational facilities and society in general to elicit interest in topics pertaining to social and environmental cohesion, balance and harmony, something well alluded to by Jacques Fresco in the following talk. That talk is entitled Raising Children, Kids Learning Incentive, Jacques Fresco, The Venus Project. In a social system based on the humane application of the scientific method for social concern, the onus would be on you to provide evidence that your proposal is more effective than current methods. If the efficacy of your idea cannot be demonstrated through rigorous testing, then it will simply not come to fruition. In a sense, this would be a true understanding of a merited work ethic, whereas in our society it is left to the limited spectrum of luck, socio-economic background, and whether or not your idea can make a profit or not. Making a profit, becoming a success, and paying your taxes to a fundamentally inefficient, wasteful, war-orientated and poverty-producing system such as ours would surely be the last thing that anyone of any sound moral or ethical integrity would want to do or contribute to. The general social attitude within an NLRBE would instead attempt to reinforce the importance of understanding and appreciating the integrity of the social fabric as a whole through a collaborative social endeavour. Removing the sources of social frustration via a systems approach. Casting these points aside for a moment, let's entertain the notion that someone does engage in such lazy behaviour in an NLRBE. What would be our cause for frustration over such behaviour exactly? Remember, there are no taxes from your labour needed to pay for these people to live the life O'Reilly, because there's no money and no state to pay taxes to. With the majority of the remaining mundane and dangerous human labour having been eliminated through mechanisation, any remaining jobs would require only a fraction of the human population to maintain the smooth operation of society. Surely we would not want such important work to be carried out by people who do not want to do it willingly, would we? This would surely only lead to resentment, ill will, and the task being carried out in an inadequate, substandard fashion, compromising the overall integrity and functionality of society in general. With an access abundance provided for all life needs without the need for a price tag in an efficient and physically referenced socio-economic system, the hindrance such a lazy person would have on our shared planetary resources and public services would also be extremely negligible. So once again, what mechanisms would exist in such a scenario for a person's actions and attitude of this disposition to cause us such grievance? It seems to someone who used to be perpetually irritated by this behaviour that the news that such mechanisms behind the cause of such irritation could be eradicated technically is actually just yet another reason to become an advocate of this new social system rather than a critic of it. Besides, even if such a person were to spend their entire life contributing nothing meaningful to society, which once again would be highly unlikely given the reinforcements for such aberrant behaviour would no longer exist, then were they to make just one positive contribution to any area of social function during their lifetime, the likelihood is that this would not have had to have been of any major significance to be a net benefit to society as a whole. To be absolutely clear, this is not to imply that people must prove their worth to society to live in an NLRBE. The focus would instead be to attempt to decipher where the causality lies in the creation of such a disposition and address it there, rather than the irrational and baseless disposition of blaming the individual for their behaviour in isolation from surrounding environmental influences. If any concern were to exist over such a disposition in such a social model, it would be far more likely to be one of sympathy rather than hostility, as the person in question was clearly not exposed to learning in such a way in which some aspect of this awe-inspiring and amazing reality in which we find ourselves did not inspire them toward a positive endeavour of some sort in their life. A humorous analogy could be added in the context of the current social environment to sum up this issue as well, perhaps. That being that those who are irritated by the attitude of the work shy never seem to complain about benefit cheats stealing their air supply. The reason that this does not occur is because air is abundant and money is not. The idea of jobs for the sake of them is amusingly ridiculed by comedian Steve Hughes in the following clip. And that clip is entitled Steve Hughes on Jobs, which was included at the beginning of this radio show for the version on Blog Talk, but not on YouTube for copyright purposes. So if you do want the full effect of a radio show, please do sign up to us on Blog Talk. It's a great way to support the show, and obviously it's nice to hear the full artistic intent of a person's radio show. So do sign up to us on Blog Talk. It is a better way of listening to the radio shows. Okay, so back to the article. The reverence and social capital given to hard work and employment for the sake of it is yet another much needed change in the attitude of the overall zeitgeist if we are to make the transition to an NLRBE. If you work hard to earn a living selling arms in the military, the oil industry, or in the arena of financial trading, then what you are doing at best creates nothing of net worth for the future prosperity of society, and at worst has a highly detrimental and negative consequence for our collective human health and environmental well-being. Even though this seems to be entirely self-evident, these professions still carry great reverence and social capital in most social circles. This stands in stark contrast to the kind of attitude required for a peaceful and collaborative social condition to emerge. Think first, work second. This is why thinking should be held above and beyond mere hard work for the sake of it. On the face of it, this may sound like a sensible disposition, but it is actually an often overlooked principle in practice in most schools, whose message instead often tends to reinforce the idea of hard work first and thinking second, sadly. Were we to reiterate the social and moral imperative of the work to which you are engaged in and encourage people to think about how to resolve human problems, rather than merely upholding the social status quo given to mere busy work, then we would be making an important and positive shift in social attitude towards a more peaceful and sustainable socio-economic condition. Children especially must come to see that it is what you do that counts in life, and not just what you say or how much money you earn. If this value system can be adopted at a young age and carried into adult life, then the impact on our social values, customs, and the entire structure of our socio-economic system would be profound. A point well made by Seven Suzuki in her amazing and inspiring speech given at the UN in 1992. And that's Seven Kulis Suzuki at Rio Summit 1992. Curiosity, the cure for boredom. To have a lifelong love of learning is critical to encounter new information as not simply a mere chore to be endured, but as a pursuit in one of the very best parts of being human, curiosity. With this attribute as an indemnable part of one's character, you will never spend a day in this life bored. The promotion of curiosity, along with the shunning of simple busy work in favour of tasks that actually raise social capital, must become the new social gravitas for future generations to aspire towards if we are to make the transition to a social model capable of meeting the needs of all the world's people sustainably. A point well made in the following video by Alan Watts, and a video that could be useful to show in school presentations when talking about such issues with older children perhaps. And that video is entitled, What If Money Was No Object? Alan Watts. This is why the approach of taking this message into schools makes sense yet again, as the reinforcement to see this issue in many of the negative perspectives outlined above has yet to take place for children, as they have not had to work or pay taxes yet. Were we to go to schools and deliver an understanding about what solutions are available to address human and environmental problems and encourage children to live a life which makes the world a better place rather than merely making money for the sake of making money, then the transition to a better world could start to take place in earnest. So please be sure to visit the Action in Education section of this website to find out more about how to take part in this highly rewarding and beneficial experience. So that concludes the essays from the Minds in the Making section of TZM Education, and really brings to a close as well the relaunch of tzmeducation.org as a project. There's not really much left to be said on this. I have talked till I'm blue in the face about the subject now, and so while still promoting it, of course, through several movement channels, I'm going to move on to new territory now. That territory, which I will discuss in a future radio show, is going to be the First Christmas project, which I launched a few years ago, but through other commitments I haven't been able to spend much time on. I'm going to relaunch that in earnest, because I feel that Christmas is really the pinnacle of consumption, which is the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems on this planet at the moment. And there's values that are embedded in the Christmas festival that are ideal to piggyback on or infiltrate, or whatever you want to say, to actually start spreading a true sense of goodwill in the world. I realise this is summer and perhaps not the time to really be talking about this in any great detail, but just for those of you who aren't aware of what I'm talking about, it's a campaign where you have an icon that you add to your Facebook picture profile of a a golden sea with a Christmas hat on it, which links basically to a campaign that basically says that this Christmas, if your friends and family are stuck for what to get you, they don't really know what to buy, then you would rather they just give the money to charity instead, because essentially you're saying that you already have your needs met. The underlying implication in that statement is, I have my needs met. Do you have yours met? And the person perhaps has never even bothered to think about it, because we're all being so distracted with our wants all the time. And so I think that has a good underlying message. And of course, the reason for it being a social attribute is on Facebook is that if it's large enough, it can actually spread like wildfire, which would be a fantastic thing. A good example of this recently is the very good news, positive step forward, that gay marriage has been legalized in several states, I believe, or possibly all states, I think, in America. It's the same over here in England. And on the news of that, people had the ability to sort of rainbow colour their Facebook picture, profile picture on Facebook. And there was loads of them. They were everywhere. Now imagine if we could replicate that same campaign at Christmas. And although charity is the ultimate sticking plaster over a system that doesn't work to meet human need, it nonetheless starts to birth this gift economy type mentality and get people thinking about their own internal contradictions that really circle around this crazy consumption festival and our lives in general. So if we're talking about a value shift needing to occur in human values, then I would think that that is a very good project to undertake. So cut a long story short, I'm going to be spending a bit more time on working out how to do that. As well as, of course, running the radio show in terms of submissions, as I mentioned earlier, so please do send them in. But to close out this radio show, I'm going to finish by reading a quote from Buckminster Fuller, followed by a song that I found on YouTube whilst typing in various things such as "I hate my job," which proved to be successful because I found a little gem of a tune that goes by the same title by an artist called Hydro. And that is spelt Highdro. So yes, I hope you enjoy that, and I'll get on with reading this quote from Buckminster Fuller. We must do away with the absolutely specious notion that everyone has to earn a living. It is a fact today that 1 in 10,000 of us can make a technological breakthrough capable of supporting all the rest. The youth of today are absolutely right in recognising this nonsense of earning a living. We keep inventing jobs because of this false idea that everybody has to be employed at some kind of drudgery, because according to Malthusian Darwinian theory, he must justify his right to exist. So we have inspectors of inspectors and people making instruments for inspectors to inspect inspectors. The true business of people should be to go back to school and think about whatever it was they were thinking about before somebody came along and told them they had to earn a living. And I'm sure that is precisely what this chap would quite like to do. So I will leave you with his fine words and bid you farewell, and speak to you soon, guys. Take care.